Hi, it's Ros here with a tag for Tag Tuesday, and the tag I'm doing is Nature Writing Naturally tag, which was originated by Emma at a couple of books, but I saw it on My Reading Life where Heidi was doing it. And the reason for doing it this week is because it ties in really nicely with SpringAThon, which is hosted by Emma of a couple of books and Natalie of the Curious Reader. And SpringAthon is about, in the first 2 weeks of May, trying to get us to read a bit of nature writing. The tag is, it's all about nature writing, basically. So the first prompt is, what's your favourite nature writing book or author? And I've mentioned before on this channel that I'm a big fan of Robert Macfarlane, and he writes books that are in some ways hard to define. They're not exactly one thing or another. There's often an element of travel, an element of history, archaeology, folklore, literature, but always a very strong element of writing about the natural world, the environment, nature and our place in it, I suppose. And one of his books that's particularly, I guess, strongly about nature rather than sort of other topics like history and so on is The Wild Places. It was one of the first Robert Macfarlane books I read. I'm trying to think when it came out. Let me think. 2007. Yeah, it's one of the books that really kind of got me enthused. That and Old Ways were two of his books that really got me enthused by him. And in it, he basically sort of travels around the UK looking for places that are still wild. Like, do we still have wild places even in a country as sort of overpopulated apparently as Britain? And like many of my favourite books, it has a map at the beginning, and I'm going to show you this map, okay, because you see how very much nature and the wild is embedded in this book. But also, what do you notice about this map? Yeah, it's upside down in our minds. Well, of course, there is no upside down, is there? We live on a globe, but we're so used to seeing Great Britain one way up that it's really disconcerting to see a picture of it the other way around, isn't it? But he really enjoyably explores the wild places that you can still find in this country, and I love to get out and walk and enjoy those wild places. The other book of his that I've picked out to sort of epitomise the loveliness of Robert Macfarlane is Landmarks. This is a more recent one. This came out when 2015. It's not his newest is Underland, which I've enthused about before, but Landmarks is in some ways, it's a book about our connection with nature and the landscape through words. And one of the things that he has become aware of is that there are so many kind of like words that we have for the natural world and the landscape around us and natural phenomena and the weather and so on, and that those are gradually slipping away from us. And in this book, as well as writing about nature and the landscape, he's trying to recapture some of those words for us. Sort of in between the essays chapters in the book, you get like glossaries of some of this vocabulary that we could now be losing. And I particularly looked, obviously, for words that relate to Sussex, which is where I live, and the nature in Sussex. And there was one word in here which I loved so much that Steve and I started using it to kind of keep this word still in current use. And that's sun scald. And that's a patch of bright sunlight on the surface of water. So, you know, when you look at the sea and you see that sort of glittering patches of sun, that's sun scald. There you go. There are words in here that are words that he is worrying might be lost, but that I know are still very much used locally. One is bostel, or bostel, which is a word for a path up the chalk downland that kind of sinks into the chalk and is used for getting animals up and down from the downs. Well, they're absolutely still called that locally, and so that's reassuring. Another one that he picks out is pells. Pell being a Sussex word for a deep pool under a waterfall, and the local outdoor swimming pool in the next town from where I live, a town where I used to live at one point, and where I have family called Lewis. The pool there is called the Pells. So thank heaven that's a word we're not losing. It's and the area around it is called the Pells. So trying to hang on to some of these words, I guess. You might know that a kind of linked book that he's done for children with an artist, and the artist's name has gone out of my head, but I will put it in the description below. It's called the book's called The Lost Words, and it's an illustrated book for children because he realised that the Oxford Junior Dictionary for children, a book of words for children, the most recent editions have sort of dumped a load of the nature words that used to be in that book. So words like goldfinch or dandelion, like lovely words that you'd think children should know, they've decided are not really relevant for 21st century British children, which seems really sad. So it's a book of kind of poems and illustrations to kind of try and stop those words from being lost from children's vocabulary. Gorgeous thing. I've given it to some children of my acquaintance. Oh, so that's a favourite. Oh, that was too much because that's too long on my first favourite nature writing author, so I'm going to go a lot faster now. Okay, so recommend a book about plants. Well, I cheated a little here. I have two books, and they're books about peas. Yes, honestly, peas. What they actually are is books about Gregor Mendel, who was the geneticist. Well, he didn't know he was a geneticist. He thought he was a monk who was interested in plants, who studied how variation in peas could be created by crossbreeding, and basically he was exploring the fundamentals of inheritance and of genetics. This is a biography of his work. This, which is the one I'm kind of recommending to you really, I guess, is Mendel's Dwarf by Simon Mawer, or Mawer. Never sure how to pronounce that surname. That's funny, isn't it? Mawer. And is a novel inspired by Gregor Mendel, and it intertwines his story back in the 19th century and a story of a fictional great nephew of his who's a modern day geneticist, and kind of explores some of the, and who happens to have to be a dwarf, to have and explores issues around eugenics and so on. It's both a good novel and full of interesting ideas, and is technically about plants. Okay, now next, recommend a book about animals. The book I'm going to recommend, I don't have and I wish I did, is In the Shadow of Man by Jane Goodall. Now that came out in 1971 and is her book about her time, her life's work really, but she hadn't done her life's work at that point in 1971, observing chimpanzees in Gombe. And that kind of detailed observational study of their behaviour. Such a intriguing and worthwhile area of study. She's sort of single-handedly done so much to improve our understanding of our closest relatives in the animal kingdom, the great apes. Inspirational woman. And my parents got that book when it first came out in 1971, so I'd have been 7, and it was like hanging around the house, and I would pick it up and like look at the pictures and read little bits, because obviously it was an adult book, not suitable for a 7-year-old. And then gradually, by the time I was in my teens, I'd read the whole book piecemeal, as it were, and I think it really kind of influenced my interest in nature and animals, and kind of almost environmentalism, I suppose. A book about water or the sea. Now, I thought I can't do a selection recommendation without recommending a book of poetry. So I'm going to recommend Dart by Alice Oswald, and that is a sequence of poems inspired by the River Dart in Devon, a river that comes down from Dartmoor, beautiful moorland, to the sea. Lovely, lovely book. Recommend a book about birds. Now, for that, I've picked The Seabird's Cry by Adam Nicolson. I've chosen lots of books about birds, but the reason I chose that one is it's because it's one of those books that, for me, absolutely hits that sweet spot between valuable, interesting, factual content and a kind of personal take and passion on the subject. So Adam Nicolson loves seabirds, but he's not a scientist. But what he's done is he's written a book where he talks about 10 different species of seabird, most of which, I mean, you probably know, our seabird numbers are crashing. They're all becoming much more vulnerable. You know, things like puffins, gannets. Yeah, it's Arctic terns. It's alarming what is happening with our seabirds. He goes into the latest knowledge about the lives of seabirds, the incredible distances they travel, really, the factual content is there, but so is a human response to them, links to poetry, and you say, very enjoyable book. Warm recommendation, that one. Recommend a book about travel, and travel with a kind of like nature-y kind of connection. Okay, now, when I picked Robert Macfarlane as my favourite nature writing author, there was a competitor for that title, and that is Roger Deakin. Roger Deakin is like... he died in, I think, 2006, but basically he's like the king of environmentalist nature writing in the UK, I would say. Not as in books that sort of inspire a sort of emotional response and understanding of why it matters. I'm not putting that very well, but the book that I'm going to, two books, I'm cheating again, two, that I'm going to recommend is Waterlog, A Swimmer's Journey Through Britain. So basically what he set out to do was to travel around the country while swimming, so swimming in rivers and lakes and ponds and the sea, almost like trying to reclaim our right to do that, and this in many ways been the inspiration of the wild swimming movement in the UK. He then did another book which was actually published just after his death, which is even dearer to my heart because that's Wildwood, A Journey Through Trees, and probably trees and woods are my favourite places in nature, if that makes sense. The closest I get to being really spiritually kind of inspired is in an ancient woodland or an avenue of beech trees, and yeah, he explores woods not just in the UK but in Australia, in he goes all over the place really, and yeah, thinks about the history of trees and woods and our relationship with them. Roger Deakin, good chap. Next prompt, what nature writing book are you most excited about that's on your TBR? Okay, so this is Surfacing by Kathleen Jamie. Now, a couple of months ago I read a book of poetry by Kathleen Jamie that I picked up almost randomly in the library because of the cover, which had kind of mountains and birds and things on it and an old rusty swing, and something about it caught my eye. Really enjoyed it. She's a writer who writes in part inspired by nature, her poetry. But it also turned out, I realised, that she's written 3 books, I think, of kind of like nature come travel writing. And having read her poetry, I thought I must read those. And I picked out Surfacing, yeah, it's like essays that, well, I'm really looking forward to it, and when I've read it, I'll no doubt enthuse about it on BookTube somewhere. So, but then the second prompt I really liked, because of these kind of like pair of prompts, which is, what nature writing book are you most excited about that you don't have access to yet? And Surfacing, I was able to get on Kindle, but the book which I would like to be reading right now is The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohllenben, and it's a book that's been highly recommended. And we bought it for Tilly's partner for his birthday, and I've seen the book, and which he has, and was hoping to read it when he and Tilly had finished with it. But sadly, of course, with lockdown, I can't, because that book is now in Leeds and I'm in Brighton, and never the twain shall meet for some months. But when this is over, and it's not a book you want to get on as an ebook, because it has, like, certainly the edition we've got him has lovely pictures of trees all the way through it, and that's part of the joy of the book. So I'll look forward to that in a few months' time. Prompt number 9, why do you love nature writing? Well, if you love nature, aren't you bound to love nature writing? Well, no, maybe not. Maybe some people that love nature think, why would I read a book about it? I'll just get out and enjoy it, which is perhaps fair enough. But I enjoy other people's passion about nature that I share with them, as it were, when I read. I enjoy learning things about nature that I didn't know. But I also, as you gather from my choices, I enjoy the sort of philosophical, poetic, our response to nature, as well as the kind of practical, I've got books to help me identify birds and identify flowers and sort of factual ones. But I like the way, we're part of nature and how that is important in our life. And one of the things that I'm aware of during this coronavirus lockdown is how much good it does me to get out into our local natural environment and, feel grass beneath my feet and clouds above me and listen to the birds and look at the flowers and get into the green, the trees. Yeah, it's really important for our well-being, mental well-being. I think the Japanese have a word for it, don't they, about taking like a green bath. I must look that up. I'm sure Sean the Book Maniac could tell me. But how it's good for our brain. Now, and I actually like novels. I've realised, that I like novels that really draw on nature and the landscape. One I really enjoyed last year was Everything Under by Daisy Johnson. It's a good novel, but I think the reason I liked it so much was because it's set kind of on the canals of Oxfordshire, and there's so much in the book that's about that environment, the trees, the birds. Beastings by Benjamin Myers, that's one I'd recommend. That's set in the Lake District in Cumbria, and it's an odd book with kind of like a chase going on, but the landscape is really kind of key in the book. Another one I read last year, where nature and the landscape's really fundamental to the novel, is Salt. I've forgotten who it's by, but I'll put it in the description. But it's set in the salt marshes of North Norfolk, and that landscape of salt marshes, and I know the salt marshes of Essex even better because my godmother used to live there. I used to go there as a child. There's something very flat and mysterious and special about the landscape of the salt marshes and the kind of birds and plant life that you get there. Oh, I'm going off on one again, aren't I? Last prompt, number 10, describe the nature around where you live. Now, I must try and not kind of like give you like a lecture here, but I live by sort of on the edge of the South Downs, and the South Downs are chalk hills, and the the habitat, that's what I'm looking for, the habitat of chalk grassland is very, very special. Now, it doesn't perhaps look it, it looks like grassy slope, no big deal. Now, the favourite quote about chalk downland grassland is that it's like Britain's tropical rainforest in terms of the variety of plant species that is found there. So like in a square metre of chalk downland grassland, you can find 40 species of flowering plant. That's wild. Square metre, yeah. Now, it's special because you've got like a thin and sort of not nutrient rich, nutrient poor layer of soil on top of very well drained chalk, and so you don't get a lush grass which kind of pushes out the variety of other plant species. But for chalk downland to support that grassland habitat, it has to be grazed, but not intensively farmed, non-intensively grazed by sheep or cattle. If it's just left to its own devices, it reverts to scrubland. It's because chalk grassland it's a habitat that has evolved since the Neolithic clearance of the trees from chalk downland. So yeah, it's a human relationship with that landscape that makes it what it is. It's very beautiful. It's very lovely. Orchids, butterflies, larks. Yeah. Yes. Oh, I could go on for hours talking about that, but I won't. But if you ever get the chance to come to Sussex or Hampshire or the North Downs in Kent and experience the beauty of chalk grassland, do, but you have to get up close. You need to get down on your knees to see it in its full glory, because you could just think you're walking across sort of some boring bit of grass, but you're not. The tragedy is that we have lost 80% of our downland grassland habitat since the Second World War, so it's a precious and threatened bit of nature. There you go. Now, the final thing in this tag is to do a shout out to another channel, where run by a booktuber who reads nature writing. I've realised that I don't really got lots of booktubers that I love dearly, and none of them really seem to particularly write about nature. Lots of people into history, and so the one person I think I can shout out is Tilly, my daughter, because she has a love of nature, as I do, and she doesn't particularly, I think, talk about nature writing on her channel, but maybe this will encourage her to, and she can talk about that blessed book about the hidden life of trees, which I've got no way of accessing at the moment. So over to you, Tilly, and bye.